Imagine a surgeon needs to cut an early-stage cancer out of the inside of your stomach or, your colon.
Right. High stakes.
Extremely high stakes. Yeah. Because the catch here is that the wall of that organ is basically paper thin.
Mm.
So if their electrosurgical knife goes even like a fraction of a millimeter too deep, they slice right through the entire organ wall.
Which is a disaster. You're spilling the contents of the digestive tract straight into the abdominal cavity.
Yeah, an absolutely catastrophic complication.
I mean, the margin for error is essentially zero because you have the mucosa, that's the surface layer where the lesion actually is.
Right.
And then just underneath that, you have the muscularis propria, the deep muscle layer keeping the whole organ structurally intact. The surgeon has to somehow separate those two layers, which are normally bound super tightly together.
They can't even think about making a cut until they do. So to cheat this anatomy, surgeons basically create a temporary artificial swelling.
Yeah, they use a needle, go down through the endoscope, and just inject a fluid straight into the tissue underneath the lesion.
Right. They are intentionally creating a localized edema.
Right.
Basically a fluid blister right inside the gut to physically lift that dangerous tissue away from the vital muscle layer below.
And in the surgical world, this is really the foundational step of procedures like an endoscopic mucosal resection, so EMR, and endoscopic submucosal dissection, ESD.
And they call that injected blister a submucosal fluid cushion, right?
Yeah.
An SFC.
Exactly. Mechanically, you are building a temporary buffer zone.
Which brings us to our mission for today. Welcome to the Deep Dives, by the way. Today we are taking a massive stack of biomechanical, physiological, and surgical research to answer a really specific but kind of mind-blowing question.
It really is.
How does creating this localized edema via injection actually alter the mechanical and, crucially, the electrical resistance of the tissue during the procedure?
Because, as we found out very quickly in the research, injecting fluid into human tissue doesn't just physically push things apart, it fundamentally changes the entire microscopic environment.
Right. And to understand those changes, we first have to map out the immediate mechanical reality of forcing liquid into a human body. Because tissue isn't just, an empty balloon waiting to be inflated.
No, not at all. It is a highly complex architectural structure. If you look at the modeling of subcutaneous injections, like the studies tracking how insulin disperses into the body, for example.
Yeah, those were fascinating.
You find that the interstitial space, so the area between the cells, it behaves as what they call a poroelastic medium.
Breaking that down a bit, poroelastic means we are dealing with two properties simultaneously, right? It's porous, so it has microscopic holes like a sponge, but it's also elastic.
Exactly, meaning it has a physical structure that naturally wants to snap back to its original shape when it gets deformed.
And that elasticity fights back aggressively.
Yeah.
Like when a surgeon injects fluid, the tissue structure pushes back, generating this massive tissue counterpressure.
Right, and the research actually measures the permeability of this tissue, which basically dictates how easily fluid can flow through those microscopic gaps.
And it is astonishingly small.
Oh, it's tiny. The permeability is estimated to be around 10 to the negative 11th to 10 to the negative 10th square meters.
That is essentially a microscopic brick wall. I mean, the tissue absolutely does not want to let this fluid flow through it.
Not at all. And right alongside that, the sources measure the bulk modulus.
Right, the bulk modulus.
Yeah.
Which is the amount of force required to actually displace the tissue and make room for this new volume of liquid.
And that sits at around 100,000 pascals.
Which is wild. To put that in perspective for you listening, 100,000 pascals is roughly equal to standard atmospheric pressure.
Yeah.
So the surgeon's tiny little injection needle is fighting against literally an entire atmosphere of resistance just to create space for a few milliliters of fluid.
And the body immediately registers this artificial swelling as a massive problem, right? It tries to relieve the pressure immediately.
It calls in the plumbing.
Exactly. It activates the primary lymphatic system to drain the area. But the mechanics of how this drainage activates is, well, it's fascinating. For decades, the assumption was always that valves in the body open purely because of fluid pressure.
Right, like water building up behind a dam until it finally just bursts open.
But the research introduces the Rossi hypothesis, which completely flips that entire concept on its head.
Yeah, the Rossi hypothesis argues that the primary lymphatic valves don't blow open from fluid pressure at all. Instead, they are structurally anchored to the surrounding tissue, by these tiny microscopic filaments.
And those anchoring filaments change everything because as the surgeon forces fluid into that submucosal space, the entire tissue architecture has to expand.
It's stretching out.
Right. And because those filaments are tethered to the overlapping endothelial cells, the cells that actually make up the lymphatic valves, the expanding tissue physically pulls the valve flaps apart.
I love this visual. It's basically like trying to inflate a giant balloon inside a tightly packed suitcase.
That's a great way to picture it.
Right. Like the clothes inside, representing the tissue, they resist the expansion, pushing back with that 100,000 pascals of force.
Right.
But as you keep pumping air into the balloon, the sheer physical stretching of the suitcase walls actually yanks the zippers, the lymphatic valves open sideways.
The swelling literally drags the drainage system open, and the math on this in the sources is incredibly precise.
Yeah, they had an exact number.
They calculate that these endothelial sliding doors are pulled open the exact moment the circumference of the lymphatic capillary exceeds a critical threshold of 66.8 micrometers.
66.8 micrometers. The second the tissue stretches past that microscopic boundary, the drains are just wide open.
Wide open. So the body is actively trying to flatten the cushion the surgeon just painstakingly created.
But, and this is where things get really weird. As we dig into the cellular level, we find a massive paradox. We've established that forcing fluid causes physical expansion and triggers those lymphatic sliding doors. But inside the tissue matrix itself, the mechanical resistance, what the researchers call tissue compliance, undergoes this completely counterintuitive biochemical shift.
This is where we have to look at the actual structural net holding the tissue together. So the extracellular matrix is largely made up of this hyaluronic gel.
Okay.
And this gel naturally wants to expand and take up space, but it is tightly trapped by a rigid, overlapping network of collagen fibrils.
I was trying to visualize this when I read it. Instead of just like a simple net holding a sponge, it actually reads more like a compressed spring held together by molecular zip ties.
Yeah, that's accurate.
Right. The hyaluronic gel is the compressed spring. It's constantly pushing outward. And the collagen network is the structure holding it in place.
Right.
But the crucial part is how that collagen connects to the actual cells, the fibroblasts.
Right. They are locked together via very specific receptors called beta-1 integrin receptors.
And those receptors are the zip ties keeping the entire spring loaded and rigid.
And the physical integrity of the tissue relies entirely on those beta-1 integrin bonds. But studies modeling sudden fluid accumulation, whether that's from early septic shock or, interestingly enough, high-intensity focused ultrasound treatments.
Oh, right, the HIFU models.
Yeah, they reveal a massive systemic reaction. When a surgeon forcefully injects a bolus of fluid, creating that sudden localized edema, that violent mechanical stretch actually disrupts the beta-1 integrin connections.
The zip ties snap.
Exactly. They just snap.
And I actually have to pause here because this caused a major logical roadblock for me when I was going through the research.
How so?
Well, if we are pumping more physical mass, right, a larger volume of fluid, into a confined space, the laws of physics suggest the mechanical pressure should strictly go up.
Sure, yeah.
You're stuffing more material into a fixed box. How can the tissue possibly relax?
I mean, it seems impossible until you factor in what they call the aggregate modulus of the interstitium.
Right.
The aggregate modulus essentially measures the overall stiffness of the solid tissue matrix, ignoring the fluid. So when that fluid bolus forces those beta-1 integrin receptors to detach, the solid collagen fibroblast network just surrenders all its structural tension.
The cage essentially unlocks.
The structural integrity fails, and because the cage unlocks, the tissue compliance, its willingness to stretch into form, suddenly increases.
Okay, and here is the paradox. Because the tissue matrix rapidly expands and softens to accommodate the intrusion, the interstitial fluid pressure actually decreases temporarily.
Even though you just pumped way more volume into the space.
It's crazy. The localized edema immediately following injection physically breaks the tension of the collagen network. It transforms this tight, unyielding wall of tissue into a relaxed, accommodating reservoir.
And that drop in aggregate modulus temporarily alters the submucosal tissue resistance, which honestly is the only biological reason the cushion can hold a meaningful amount of fluid without instantly blowing out the sides.
Right, the tissue is basically surrendered mechanically. But, and it's a big but, you still have those lymphatic sliding doors pulled wide open at that 66.8 micrometer threshold.
Yeah, they were actively trying to drain the reservoir the whole time.
Which sets up a massive engineering problem for the surgeon who is about to bring in, an electrosurgical knife.
Because the surgeon desperately needs that fluid cushion to act as a physical buffer. The mucosa on top needs to be cut. The deep muscle layer on the bottom needs to stay perfectly safe.
Right, and if the cushion drains, that gap disappears, and the patient risks severe thermal injury. Now, for decades, the standard fluid used to create this cushion was just normal saline.
Which makes sense biologically. Saline is very compatible with the body. But mechanically, it is a total disaster for this specific task.
Because it behaves just like water.
Right. It has very low viscosity.
And since the tissue is poroelastic and constantly pushing back, and those lymphatic sliding doors are actively pulling the fluid away, the saline just gets absorbed almost immediately.
Yeah. Endoscopists would inject the saline, look up at their monitor, and literally before they could even align their cutting tools, the cushion would just go flat. The protective gap just vanishes.
So this failure of saline launched a massive quest in the biomedical community to engineer the perfect fluid.
It really did. Researchers started testing a wild variety of concoctions in pig stomachs and human cadavers, just trying to beat this mechanical drainage issue.
Some of the stuff they tried was crazy. The literature lists experiments with 50% dextrose, hyaluronic acid, succinylated gelatin, fibrinogen.
They were hunting for high viscoelasticity. They essentially needed a fluid that resists the sheer flow of being pushed out through the lymphatics, but retains enough elasticity to actually stretch and lift the tissue vertically.
Right. And the modern innovations have moved entirely past basic biological fluids into the realm of advanced polymer science.
Oh yeah, it's basically sci-fi now. One of the standout solutions discussed in the sources is a chitosan mixture containing beta-glycerophosphate.
The thermal behavior of that chitosan mixture is incredible. Because, think about it, the surgeon needs the fluid to be thin and watery so it can easily travel down a long, narrow endoscopic needle without clogging.
Right, so the chitosan solution enters the needle as a low-viscosity liquid at room temperature.
Just flows right in.
Exactly. At room temp, polymer chains in the chitosan are loose. They easily slide past one another. But the moment it hits the body's internal temperature, so 37 degrees Celsius,
Yep.
the added heat actually causes the hydrophobic interactions between the molecules to strengthen. The loose chains suddenly snap together, undergoing a full phase transition.
And the liquid instantly locks into a highly interconnected, rigid, porous gel inside the tissue.
It basically sets up like structural jello the second it gets warm.
So the body's pushing back with 100,000 pascals of force, the sliding doors are open, but the gel is just too physically large and rigid to be drained.
It's brilliant. And another massive innovation in the sources is a product called Eleview, which relies on a material known as Poloxamer 188.
All right, Poloxamer 188, that's a reverse phase emulsion, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a triblock copolymer, which basically means its molecules have a water-loving hydrophilic tail and a water-hating hydrophobic core.
Okay, so how does that work in the tissue?
Well, when it's injected into the submucosal space, the body temperature and the physical environment cause these molecules to aggressively group together into micelles. They form this incredibly dense matrix.
So it actively reconfigures its molecular structure upon injection to stack vertically.
Exactly.
It doesn't just fill the space like a puddle. It actively maintains its vertical height, lifting the lesion away from the muscle and just stubbornly resisting the sheer flow of those draining lymphatics.
So science has essentially solved the mechanical problem of the cushion going flat by engineering these fluids that outsmart the body's natural drainage architecture.
Okay, so you have a perfect sci-fi gel that holds its shape.
Mm-hmm.
Mechanically, the patient is safe. The gap exists. But by introducing these highly engineered viscous fluids, you have entirely changed the electrical environment that the surgeon's knife is about to fire into.
And this is such a critical pivot in the procedure.
Yeah, because the injected fluid fundamentally alters the electrical resistance of the tissue.
Exactly. You have to remember, EMR and ESD don't use cold steel scalpels. They rely on monopolar high-voltage electrosurgical currents.
Electricity.
Yeah. The surgeon uses a tiny metal tip to deliver intense electrical energy that instantly boils the water inside the target cells, literally vaporizing them to cut the tissue.
While simultaneously coagulating the surrounding blood vessels to prevent bleeding.
Right. But whenever you introduce electrical current into a physical space, you are immediately battling Ohm's law.
Oh man, Ohm's law. Basically, current always seeks the path of least resistance. It will travel through whatever material allows it to flow most easily.
And one of the studies in the sources performed a really fascinating comparative analysis on this. They measured the impedance, so the electrical resistance, when firing these surgical tools in regular air versus firing them while immersed in normal saline.
And the results were staggering.
When the environment was flooded with saline, the electrical impedance dropped by 99%.
99% of the resistance just vanished. Because normal saline is basically salt water, right? It is incredibly conductive. It wants the electricity to flow through it.
Exactly. Inside the tissue, the electrical resistivity of your artificial fluid cushion dictates exactly where that dangerous heat goes. And normal saline has a very low resistivity, measuring only around 80 to 110 ohm centimeters.
But the more advanced viscous solutions, they behave totally differently.
Oh, completely.
Things like a 10% glucose solution, distilled water, or fibrinogen, they boast significantly higher electrical resistance. The data clocks fibrinogen at 309.7 ohm centimeters.
Which is massive.
Right. That is roughly 3 to 4 times the electrical resistance of normal saline.
But here's the thing. In everyday life, we are taught that high electrical resistance is inefficient, right? Like, a highly resistive wire in a household appliance gets unnecessarily hot and wastes energy.
It forces the machine to work harder.
Exactly. So the instinct is to assume a surgeon would want low resistance, so their cutting tools work effortlessly.
See, that was my exact thought process. If you want to cut something with electricity, shouldn't you make it as easy as possible for the current to flow? Why on earth would a surgeon actively want the fluid underneath their knife to have massive electrical resistance?
It seems completely backward. Until you look at how heat dissipation actually works in electrosurgery, the entire objective is to keep that violent, cell-vaporizing heat isolated exclusively at the microscopic tip of the knife touching the mucosa.
Which is the tissue we actually want to destroy.
Right. Now, if the localized edema underneath that mucosa is created with highly conductive normal saline, you have basically just laid down a microscopic electrical highway.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The current leaves the knife tip, realizes the fluid below offers zero resistance, and instantly dives down into the saline cushion.
So it bleeds out rapidly.
Yes. It carries that intense heat deep into the tissue bed, straight toward the muscularis propria.
Meaning a conductive fluid accidentally pulls the thermal energy away from the surface and cooks the exact deep muscle layer you injected the fluid to protect in the first place.
Exactly. You mechanically separated the tissue, but electrically. You built a bridge for the heat to cross.
That is terrifying.
It is. But by contrast, if the surgeon creates that fluid bleb using a high-impedance fluid like those viscous polymers or fibrinogen, the electrical current hits a wall.
Okay.
The current attempts to leave the knife tip and travel down, but the fluid's extreme resistance completely blocks it.
So the current is bottlenecked right at the surface.
Exactly. Because the energy cannot disperse downwards into the fluid, the high voltage stays trapped right at the point of contact. This radically improves heat dissipation in the surrounding area. The machine actually requires less total current to achieve the devastating voltage needed to vaporize the surface cells, simply because none of the energy is being lost into the fluid below.
So the high electrical resistance of the fluid cushion is what physically traps the heat at the mucosal layer. It totally prevents the thermal energy from diving deep.
Right. The fluid isn't just a spacer taking up room, it acts as an active electrical insulator.
And that insulation is what prevents post-polypectomy syndrome.
Yeah, that's the real danger here. Post-polypectomy syndrome is this severe inflammatory response where the patient suffers intense abdominal pain, fever, and localized peritonitis.
Because they got burned on the inside.
Exactly. It occurs when the electrical current travels too deep and causes a transmural burn to the muscle wall, even if there isn't a full mechanical perforation. By altering the submucosal tissue resistance electrically, you eliminate that deep thermal damage. Synthesizing this entire journey reveals just how chaotic and dynamic a simple injection really is. I mean, we set out today to understand how localized edema alters tissue resistance during a high-stakes gut surgery. And the reality is just this cascading chain reaction of physics and biology.
It really is. It begins with intense mechanical resistance, right? The pressure of the fluid injection violently stretches the tissue architecture, forcing those beta-1 integrin bonds to fail.
The zip ties snap.
Yep, the aggregate modulus drops, the tissue compliance increases, and the collagen network relaxes to just accommodate the volume.
And while that relaxation happens, the sheer physical expansion pulls the primary lymphatic valves apart sideways,
Mhm.
opening the sliding doors and attempting to drain the area at that 66.8 micrometer threshold.
Which then forces the abandonment of basic saline in favor of advanced temperature-sensitive polymers that undergo phase transitions at 37 degrees Celsius to mechanically lock the cushion in place.
And finally, those highly engineered viscous fluids introduce a crucial spike in electrical impedance. They completely transform the fluid bleb from a simple physical gap into a highly resistive thermal shield that bottlenecks the electrosurgical current and saves the deep muscle layer from being cooked.
It's incredible. The biomechanics, the molecular biology, and the electrical engineering are entirely inseparable here. Mastering the physics of pore elasticity and electrical impedance dictates the exact materials that allow surgeons to operate safely in an environment where, honestly, a millimeter of error means disaster.
I really hope you walk away from this deep dive with a profound appreciation for the invisible physics governing your own tissues.
Yeah.
The human body is just a masterpiece of hidden, microscopic architecture.
It is. And, looking at the trajectory of this research, there is a fascinating concept on the horizon for you to think about.
Ah.
Yeah, we have successfully engineered thermosensitive fluids that dynamically change their physical viscosity based on heat, right?
Yeah.
Well, the next logical leap is the development of smart fluids that dynamically adapt their electrical impedance in real time.
Oh, wow.
Imagine a polymer gel injected into the gut that actively senses the precise voltage of the surgeon's electrosurgical knife and instantly increases its own electrical resistance to perfectly match the output. It would essentially create a completely autonomous, impenetrable force field around the vital organs.
An autonomous electrical force field adapting inside the gut.
Mm.
That is unbelievable. The expectation of surgery is often just clean lines and simple mechanics, right? A scalpel removing a problem.
Yeah.
But inside the delicate lining of the stomach, the reality is incredibly murky. It is a constant battle against tissue counter pressure, snapping molecular zip ties, and high-voltage electrical pathways. And by understanding those muddy waters, true precision is finally made possible.